As always, I got a lot to cover. So let me just say thanks for everyone for coming. Those that came for my sake, and especially those that came for my mother's sake. I see some old friends here go back more than a few years. Some people are here who knew my mother before I came along. This is the 5th Yahrtzeit, as you can obviously see. And I will be remiss without thanking Ari and Howie Elbaum and Avram Klugman and Ruben Verschleiser and Jake Schuchman, of course, and all those who put everything together to make this happen, to make me just stand up here and do my thing. So without any further ado, we have time is always of the essence, and who knows what kind of crazy weather we got. And so let's get down to business. As always happens every year so far, about a month or so or thereabouts for my mom's Yortzeit, something clicks off in my head, like a topic presents itself. It looks like this is one that would be a good one. And a couple months ago, to be perfectly honest, I picked up this new biography of Old Man Kennedy. That's the father of JFK, who is a real famous hilaria, you know. And but therein lies a tale. And I see it's published by, it's written by a Jewish author, a guy named Nassau or something like that. And it was kind of interesting, and it triggered a couple of bulbs went off in my head, and I said, this is one that I can use, I think, to advantage, because it's obviously a subject that has to do with Jews, as you'll see, has to do with my mom. After all, without me going to a whole description, everybody understands all the people that were stuck in Europe. One of the reasons they were stuck in Europe because they couldn't come over here. And nowadays, in front of Jewish audiences, all you have to say is FDR, and certain things go off, right? So it's not necessary for me to go into that. Rather, I'm going to take it my way, which is to look at a historical contextualization the best I can. And I think I'll be able to make the argument that there's some unusual, very, well, certainly unintended consequences to the perpetrators of this policy of closing the golden door. So in order to understand this correctly, everybody's a historian wants to take it back to Bria Olam, to the very beginning, because that's who we are. Remember, Will Durant long ago wrote a series. He said, I want to write about Napoleon, and he really did. And he said, but you can't understand Napoleon if you don't understand the period just before Napoleon. So first I have to write that book. And I can't do that if you don't go back to Louis XIV. You can't really understand. Finally he said, the heck with, let's start with the beginning of the world and take it forward. I'm not going to do that big tonight, don't worry. But in a very narrow, focused kind of question about the Jews in America, Jewish immigration in America, that's where I want to take you by the hand and lead you through. So let's start. From the very beginning in this country, it's kind of really interesting. I mean, literally from the first day, there's always been this kind of American attitude on part of the American authorities. One Jew at a time is one thing. You know, one here, two there, three there. Even if in the aggregate it comes out a lot. A whole bunch of Jews coming at one time, it freaks you out. Right? It's a turnoff. I mean that literally when I say the very first Jews who came to the United States in 1654, which all of us remember from our youth, was New Amsterdam in the time of Peter Stuyvesant. You know, you remember that from elementary school. And the first Jews who came, well, actually it was a ship with 23 people. 23 Jews in 1654. That's the whole bar park. You know, so it freaked him out, right? Peter Stuyvesant, the famous Dutch governor of New Amsterdam, shortly before it was taken by the British and was renamed New York. This is too much. He wants to throw him out. And I'm sure many remember it didn't quite work out because the Jews appealed to the stockbroker meeting bad because New York, like all the American colonies, without exception, were owned by companies. Isn't that how this country was founded? It was literally founded by big business. The West India Company, the French companies. This country was founded by capitalist companies as a capitalist venture. I hate to say it, but that's a fact. Okay? If you're talking about capitalism, you're talking about board of directors, you're talking about stockholder meetings. Therefore, the first Jews, this is a true story, when they want to throw them out of New Amsterdam, they send a message to the stockholder meeting. Turned out a lot of people who were stockholders in the Dutch West India Company were Jewish. They raised hell at the meeting, and then next thing you know, Stuyvesant was told, just shut up and leave them alone. And so, very paradigmatic and very interesting in terms of what the Jewish presence were. Now, that's in 1654. Over the next 150 years, from time of Peter Stuyvesant to George Washington, very few Jews came to this country, and literally one at a time. I can only mention one other example. Not that you need to know this, but you're here, so why not? Savannah. Anybody here from Savannah? The Oglethorpe, the Englishman who started Georgia, you know, he bought it. He started Georgia. He sent this group here, that group there, a bunch of criminals, a bunch of this, a bunch of Jews, the Spanish Portuguese Jews. came 20, 30, 40 people, the whole Georgia went crazy, raised hell about it. And Oglethorpe says, I'm the owner here and you have to shut up and take it. And that's why Savannah is one of the oldest Jewish communities. So when it's a bunch, it's no good. If it's one at a time, it's not a big deal. And so therefore, if you look at the charts, I mean, in 1790, when George Washington was the president, there were a grand total of 2,500 Jews in America, mainly in the famous 5 communities. You had New York, you had Charleston, you had Savannah, you had, what else? You got Philadelphia, and I guess Newport. And a Jew here or there in Baltimore or Richmond, 1 or 2 or 3. And that's the end of it. So the numbers were such that there was no issue about Jewish immigration, obviously. And even if you go forward, in America in general, even as late as 1830, so that's 40 years later, nobody had moved here, from 2,500 to 8,000 approximately. Right? That's nothing in terms of numbers. And by the way, that approximates what was going on in America in general. After the American Revolution, after George Washington's time, there was very little immigration into this country for the first 20, 30 years of America, for the simple reason that in Europe they were fighting the French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars. The same year that George Washington became president, which is 1789, was the same year that the storming of the Bastille and the beginning of French Revolution and the start of 25 years of continuous war, called the French Revolutionary Wars and Napoleonic Wars, which don't end until the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, as I'm sure we all remember from high school. And nobody's moving, in those years. One of the reasons is you don't want to be in the high seas during the Napoleonic Wars. Remember all those novels and movies you saw of Captain Hornblower and such people? They take you off the ship and impress you, don't they? They take you off the ship and they impress you. You don't want to end up in the British Navy working like that, so therefore don't travel the Atlantic during wartime. And for this reason, the numbers are small. And even by 1840, now all of a sudden you see it's a big jump from 8,000 to 50,000. What happened? It's not that big, but it's a lot bigger than it was. Now in 1830 really starts the great wave of European immigration of the 19th century into the United States of America. Okay? Look how many Germans, 5 million Germans come in. How many Irishmen? That's 4.5 million. That's the legal ones, right? 3.5 million English, because they saw 4.5 million Irish, they didn't want to go, right? And 1.5 million Swedes. Isn't that a lot? You don't usually think of it that much, okay? So notice you have, compared to that, what's 50,000 or 100,000 Jews? It's very small. That's my point. The United States, from day one, and I mean that from George Washington times, craved immigration. Now, they wanted white immigration, and they wanted Western European immigration, people who more or less look like us and can blend in with us. Germans are okay, English are okay, Irish b'diavad, well, because they're Catholic, right? See what I'm saying? Oh my God, the Irish are bringing all the Pope in here. No, that was the fear. There was a lot of anti-Catholic sentiment. One of the reasons you don't have any kind of anti-Jewish uprisings in the early America is they're busy having anti-Irish uprisings, including in Baltimore, Maryland. I could go on in this in great detail, but I won't. It was a lot of violence. In Baltimore, Maryland, a lot of violence against the Irish. Of course, the Irish fought back too. But the point is that the Jews are a small number to getting under the radar screen, so to speak. And even by 1860, when the numbers got even bigger, there were 200,000 Jews in America by that time. They had come in together with the millions of the others. And so it didn't look like it's a mob of Jews pouring into America, although the numbers certainly increased significantly from 2,500 to 200,000, and eventually 250,000. Another very big reason that there wasn't that big of a difference, the Jews were German Jews, as they say. No, there's Western Jews. You get it? The Jews, when they say German Jews, it's Germany, it's Bohemia, it's Holland. They all call them German, you understand? French even, from Alsace-Lorraine. So my point is, these Jews who come here kind of dressed like the other Europeans, westernized to some degree, much more than the other ones. And certainly, coming to this country, the first thing they want to do was Americanize and westernize 200%, not 100%. And so, the old story, they get off the boat, they become a peddler, and eventually it's Macy's. I mean that. No, I mean that. If I bring a book and read, the accounts of people, they started with 2 pennies, and then they turned it to 4 pennies, and they never stopped. You understand? And your dream as a peddler is one day you can own a store, you won't have to peddle. And then once you have a store, your dream is one day be a wholesaler. You understand? And this was the life over here. So that fit in totally into the American pattern. And these Jews, as I say before, were very, very intense, more than intense, in their desire to Americanize, to learn English, certainly have their children learning English. And indeed, perhaps too much so. I mean, the whole wave of American Reform Judaism takes place precisely at this time. And the main thrust of the rise and the sweep of Reform Judaism in the United States, which sweeps almost the entire German Jewish community, all those 200,000, or the vast majority of them, is precisely because it's seen as a kind of Americanization move. You understand? Reform Judaism fits America more than Orthodox Judaism certainly does, and any other form. So all this leads to the point that there was no kind of reaction or negative reaction, not anything serious really, to the fact, there's too many Jews moving to America or anything like that. I would point out that there's no Jewish lobby anybody complain about in these years, because the Jews, although they have what to complain about, are fighting each other more than anything else. It'd be funny if it wasn't sad. For example, when they have the famous Damascus case in 1840, where they arrest these Jews in Damascus, for killing a kid in order to use the blood from matzah. And Jews are up in arms about this. They fight each other more than the government, because who appointed you the right to speak on behalf of American Jewry? And they want to have delegates from all the synagogues to go to President Van Buren. Who said that you guys can talk for me? The whole problem in America. So there wasn't a large, organized Jewish kind of presence over here. The Civil War didn't help, in the sense that wars in American history generally aggravate anti-Semitism. I don't even have to explain it to you, because just think back 5 years ago when Bush had the war in Iraq, and everybody's talking about the Jewish cabal and the neocons and all that, which you don't hear so much lately. It's just a way that happens in many cultures, unfortunately, certainly even American culture, that when the Civil War, even the Jews had nothing to do with the Civil War, obviously, they're not the cause of the Civil War, you could make that case, and people did. They said the Rothschilds and August Belmont are behind the whole thing, but not really. So in order to get to our start-off point, we'd have to go to after the Civil War and to the administration of the first significant president after the Civil War, which is Grant, President Ulysses S. Grant. Very famous person, obviously. Grant is very interesting. He was a total lo yitzlach in everything in life, a complete failure, couldn't even run a store. The only thing he knew how to do was command an army of 1 million men successfully in the field, which is something nobody else could do in the 19th century. Other than that, though, I mean that. Other than that, he couldn't do anything, including a president of the United States. He wasn't particularly successful. But Grant came into office in the election of 1868, came in 1869. He came in with the Jews very resentful, and the reason is, I'm sure many know, because of his activities in the Civil War. But Grant came in with a Jewish friend. And his Jewish friend was Simon Wolf, right? Who we'll be seeing about more. He's a person that doesn't die until the 1920s. He's very active in Jewish life and in American Jewish life in the 1920s. A German Jew comes here like all these others in around 1840, 1950 at a very young age, settles in Illinois, in a small town. His parents have a grocery store, and eventually he ends up in Washington, D.C., where he does law the old-fashioned way, apprentice with another lawyer, and becomes interested, as young people do in the Civil War times, in politics, and he's a Republican. He's a Republican, he's a member of the administration of Abraham Lincoln, and he's a Kochleffel. He wants to likes to involve himself in political matters, and he becomes a self-appointed lobbyist for the Jews. And so it's a fact. Here's a guy living in Washington, D.C., and if there's a Jewish soldier that gets in trouble and maybe he's going to get shot because he deserted or went to see his mother or some other reason like that. So, and I mean this, so he will go to Abraham Lincoln, who had an open White House. You notice from the books and the movies, this is actually true. If you're willing to wait till 2 and 3 in the morning, I mean this, I'm not kidding. If you're willing to wait till 2 and 3 in the morning, Lincoln will see you. You get it? Doesn't automatically mean he'll agree with what you do, but he gets to know him. He gets off a couple of soldiers here and there from a death squad, and things like that. He makes himself a sort of useful, you might say, and he's a big member, as I say, of the Republican Party. The Republican Party was always in trouble in this country because the South is automatically going to vote against the Republicans. They can't forgive them for getting rid of slavery. And the North is 50-50 because the Irish don't like the Republican Party, because the Democratic Party is the natural homeland of the Irish for a variety of reasons. Grant, as I say before, this guy, Wolf, makes himself a very good friend of Grant. How so? Grant had been a general, as you see over here, in the Civil War. You kind of tell he wasn't one of these tall General MacArthur type looking. He was a schlepper, but he was a genius at running 1 million men in the army. It's funny. And let's take the next one. Grant had very famously or notoriously in 1862, there's a recent book that came out on it, perhaps some of you have seen it, General Grant Expelled the Jews, as a commander in the Western Front. You know, the Civil War had the Eastern Front and the Western Front. The Eastern Front is one they make all the movies about, Robert E. Lee. Believe it or not, that was not the important one. Nobody got it at that time. Everybody thought it was because it looked so much more dramatic. And I get it, and we're going to go to Gettysburg, hopefully. But in point of actual real fact, the Western Front was the important one. In places like Illinois, Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, and all these other forlorn places. So the fact is that Grant was the commander over there, and at one point he kicked out all the Jews from the states under his control. This General Order Number 11. And look at the language he used in 1862. The Jews as a class, as a class. He didn't say this and that Jew. He says, I've become convinced by the behavior of some Jews that all the Jews living here, the Jews as a class, violating every regulation of trade established by the Treasury Department and Department orders, are hereby expelled from the Department of Tennessee within 24 hours. So no, the Department of Tennessee was Tennessee, Kentucky, I think, Mississippi, you know, a big area, right? A big area under his command. Post commanders will see to it that this class of people are immediately furnished passes and required to leave in 24 hours. And anyone returning after such notification will be arrested, held in confinement till opportunity of sending them out as prisoners unless furnished with permit from headquarters. No passes will be given these people to visit headquarters for the purpose of making, because he knows right away the Jews will come and complain and say, I got a cousin here and this, that, and the other. No Jews. So look at this. In a letter of the same date sent to the Assistant Secretary of War, Grant explained his reasoning. I have long believed, in spite of all the vigilance that can be infused into post commanders, that the specie, meaning the money regulations of the Treasury Department, have been violated mostly by Jews and other unprincipled traders. Okay? So well satisfied have I been at this that I've instructed commanding officer in Kentucky to refuse all permits to Jews to go south and frequently have them expelled from the Department of Tennessee, but they come in with their carpet sacks in spite of all that can be done to prevent it. So I try to keep them out of my area, and the Jews just bribe their way back in. And I've had all I can take of it, and there's only one way I can do so, and, you know, it gets rid of them. Now, the fact is that this caused a big scandal over here. This was a mistake of part of Grant, and the Jews complained about it, and Abraham Lincoln canceled the order. And when it was all over, Grant, having realized that he went a little too far, he denied it, and so on and so forth. Then a few years later, he's running for president, and the Jews and others, the Democratic Party, all of a sudden began great tzaddikim to say, how can you elect an anti-Semite? Because they're Democrats, the Grant's a Republican, and they want to use this issue over here. I understand that. And Simon Wolf is the one who's the champion of Grant. He says, I know the guy, he's not an anti-Semite. It's the sort of thing you hear now every time Obama appoints somebody that people think is going to be anti-Israel, and somebody steps forward and says, oh, I know this person. It's not true, really. They like the Jews, and so on and so forth. And it was a mistake, or, you know, or somebody in the staff wrote it. He didn't write in all the rest of it. And the point I'm getting at is that now you have a very popular president, which was Ulysses S. Grant, and there's one Jew that stands in good with him. It happens to be a lawyer who lives in Washington, D.C., is a self-appointed lobbyist on behalf of the Jewish people. As president, I would point out, Grant was actually very good to the Jews. He kind of obviously felt bad about what had happened. He was not a prejudiced person. That's actually the truth. If you want to be totally honest about it, 20 years after all this happened or so, a reporter asked him after he left the White House, he said, now you can let your hair down, you know. It's all over. What's the story? Did you sign it? He said, yes, I signed it, right? He said, but I no longer sustain those sentiments. Okay? So in other words, he said, yep. In with him. Grant, I would point out, tried to make amends. He offered this guy who owned Macy's to be the Secretary of the Treasury. That's a very high position in the government. The guy turned him down. It's quite unusual in early 1869 to offer a Jew to be Secretary of the Treasury. That's Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, number 2. It's a good thing for him. He turned it down because the whole administration went down in financial scandals. They all got arrested. And this guy was a Shomer Shabbos, believe it or not, and Grant wanted to make him the mayor of Washington when Washington was given a short time of home rule. Later on was changed. Now it's back to home rule. He was a prominent Jew in Washington, D.C. I'm just trying to show you that Grant, as a president, actually was a pretty good guy as far as the Jews are concerned. But what Simon Wolf was interested in was a foreign policy in this case. Here's Europe more or less in the time of Ulysses S. Grant. This is a little bit later, but it's the basic idea. Here's Germany, here's Austria, And here's this little Verstunken in Romania, right? It's a lot smaller than Romania will be after the First World War, when it'll double and triple in size. But the time I'm talking about is Romania. And there's big Russia. Romania and Russia have the distinction of being the most anti-Semitic countries. In 1800s, all the countries in Europe gave the Jews civil rights, except for Romania and Russia. Later on, Romania is small, so the other countries forced them to give them civil rights, but they did not honor it. And so already in the time Ulysses Grant, that long ago, news is coming out that the Russian government, the Iranian government, expelling the Jews using all kind of tactics to force them out of the economy, impoverish them, sometimes throw them in the river in the middle of winter, all kind of nice things. And what else is new? Now, historically, I want you to understand something. The United States of America, ever going back to the time of George Washington, said isolationism, isolationism, isolationism. And he wasn't wrong. Washington said, why should America, it's not in their interest to get involved in foreign problems, and it isn't. Because if you want to complain about the Jews in Romania, let's start talking about the way the Koreans are mistreated in Japan. Let's talk about how the British are treating the people in South Africa. Ain le dover sof. America has its own problems, and it'll never go anywhere if you do that. Plus, the fact is, George Washington was totally aware, all during the first 100 and some years of America, from 1789 until First World War, we really did what the Japanese have done with us, which is we didn't pay for defense budgets because we could rely on someone else protecting us. Isn't it true Japan even today doesn't have a formal army? And the reason is because America was there. True? So, I mean, in the 1800s, it was the British Navy. You get what I'm saying? England had what they call a balance of power. No one has a big navy like the British. The British are not going to invade America. Now, that's wrong, and they don't want to do it. If anything, the Americans sometimes think of invading Canada. And so they can't come to us. So we don't have to. How big was the American army in the time of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and even Andrew Jackson? 3,000 men? Yeah, you won't believe it. How big it was in the time, the regular army just before the Civil War? 12, 15,000 men. It's unbelievably tiny. It doesn't cost any money. Same the Navy is a couple of ships. That's one of the reasons why American economy took off in the 1800s. No defense budget. Imagine today if we didn't have to spend the zillions on the defense. Right? You say we go to healthcare before Obamacare. So he says, no, but seriously, it's zillions. And so our bottom line would look a lot better. We wouldn't have the kind of budget deficit that we have, one hopes. And so this is what was going on at that time. On the other hand, now they're persecuting the Jews. So naturally the Jews in America are angry about it. This guy, Simon Wolf, lobbies with Grant, and he gets him to appoint as the U.S. minister to Romania, the president of B'nai B'rith, Benjamin Pashado. And that's like sending a message. But Pashado said like this: America should protest and do something about the Jews over there. And the Secretary of State at that time, Hamilton Fish, a very famous person, says, no, we don't want to get involved in any kind of foreign problems. We sympathize with the Jews, but that's as far as it goes. At the same time, in Russian Empire, the Tsar of Russia, and this is the nicest of all the czars. I mean it. Alexander II was in 1870 perpetrating all kind of gezeros, throwing people out in the middle of winter out of their homes, marching them down into death marches, doing all kind of administrative little tricks, such as if the Jews own all the cigarette stores, now you declare the cigarette thing to be a government monopoly, and the government only gives it out to licenses, and guess what? All the people with licenses are not going to have Jewish names, and things of this nature. And the result is, even in the best of times in Russia, there's all of a sudden crisis made for a lot of Jews, and where are they going to go? And we're talking about 40, 50,000 people potentially. 40, 50,000 people. The United States minister to Russia, that time you have an ambassador and a minister, was a famous Civil War governor, Curtin. He's a big statue of him at Gettysburg. And he says, oh, the Jews are real bad news. Because he hobnobs with the big Russians. Like he's at the court. And so the way he hears it is, it's the Jews' fault. Right? It's not the Russians' fault. And this is the kind of information they're getting back in Washington, D.C. Well, in all this combobulation, you got 40, 50,000 Jews without a home. Where are they going to go? Everybody in Europe says the same thing. Go to America. Right? 40,000? Even American 1870 said, that's way too much. What are you going to do with them? Where are you going to put them? Simon Wolf says, I have a good idea. President Grant had just appointed as the governor of Washington, what we call today Washington, Oregon, a famous Jewish Civil War general. One of the people we'll see at Gettysburg. Edward Solomon, not a household word, but he was right there catching Pickett's charge right in the front. And Grant liked him. You won't believe this. Sherman and Sheridan, who were anti-Semitic, liked him. And Grant appointed him as governor of Washington Territory. And Washington Territory at that time was empty. And they said, put the 40,000 Jews in the Washington Territory. That'd be interesting, right? Seattle, not New York, would be the center of Judaism in America. And will it happen? And all of a sudden, the Christian groups start complaining. And they say, no, Washington should not be a place with a majority of Jews. A few Jews is one thing, but to have so many in one place is too much. The Reformed Jews in America protest. Simon Wolf was a leading Reformed Jew, but the other Reformed Jews said that we're talking about people coming with strange habits, shiftless ways, and filthy customs. They're talking about the Eastern European Jews. So it doesn't happen. Grant says, look, if the Jews are against it in America and the Christians are against America, why am I getting involved in all this? And so it doesn't happen. And so those Jews don't get to go to America. And they have a very rough time in Russia. Here we are, 1870, 70 years before Roosevelt and all that, and you already see these kind of issues popping up in unusual ways. But history has a great sense of humor. 10 years after this, 10 years later, the Tsar of Russia is assassinated. One second, the Tsar of Russia is assassinated. A new Tsar comes in. The pogroms, that's when the pogroms in 1881 begin. Contrary to popular belief, Russia is not a country of pogroms. I know we always think it that way. Russia has historically always been a country of law and order. It's a dictatorship. A dictatorship means law and order. But after 1881, there start to be these outbreaks that the police permit. And so they issue the May laws, which kick the Jews out of all the places in the economy where they had been. And then you get the start of serious Jewish immigration. So what was an issue in the time of President Grant is no longer an issue 10 years later when the President of the United States is Chester A. Arthur, as we'll see. And all of a sudden, real immigration pulls in. Look at the numbers over here. 1881, 5,000, 13,000, 8,000, 11,000, 16,000, 21,000, 33, no, 3,000. Is that 33? I can't see it. 32,000, yes it is. In other words, the numbers skyrocket. If there had been a Jewish community of 200,000 or so in a decade, it's gone crazy. And the wrong kind of Jews, the ones with the shiftless customs, what did he say before? Shiftless ways, the filthy customs, the strange habits, now they're coming by the bucket load. And they're not going to Washington State. They're staying right on the East Coast, thank you very much. You understand? It's New York, it's Baltimore, it's Philadelphia, and so forth. The Russian government at that time did not take the attitude of the Soviet government that we remember from a few years ago. The Tsar of Russia said to the Jews who were being beaten up and killed in the pogroms, why are you complaining? The door to the West is always open. Which is another way of saying, can't you leave? Must you stay? And so the Jews did. The American Jews, the German Jews were already here, whose parents had come not long ago, they really freaked out. Can't something be done to send these Jews back? Can't the U.S. government persuade Tsarist Russia to ease up so that the Russian Jews won't stream towards America? And so they petitioned the President of the United States and the Secretary of State, Chester A. Arthur and Frederick Frelinghuysen, can't you talk to the Russian government to ease up for the purpose of not making it that these people are all going to want to move to America? Not because of the human rights, but because, you get it. And then the German Jews, if they do come to America, they say, why can't these immigrants, why are they all in grocery stores and things like that? Why can't they go into agriculture or work in factory as laborers? And not one German Jew ends up going into agriculture, right? They're all peddlers who make it into Macy's. Not one German Jew wants to be a factory worker. But the Russian Jews can go and do that. And so by 1890, for the first time, the federal government begins considering closing the door to Jewish immigration. Long before Roosevelt. Okay? Long before. It's too much. I mean, look at the numbers. Now, really, this is anti-Semitism because 20,000 here, 30,000 there, it doesn't equal anything near all the Irish and all the Germans and all the Swedish and the other thing coming in. Nowhere near it. Okay? But that's different. That's different. Simon Wolf, who wasn't a particularly nice guy and hated Orthodox Judaism and all this kind of stuff, steps forward and becomes a hero. He becomes the self-appointed lobbyist, and then the Reform Jews back him. And he lobbies the administrations of Benjamin Harrison, Grover Cleveland, William McKinley, right? All these guys. I mean, goes every day to the immigration department, to the other federal agency involved in here, talks to the people in Congress, makes friends with the important and influential congressmen, does whatever he needs. There's a one-man show to learns all the regulations. We're talking about a world of regulation. Nobody can come in if they're going to be a public charge. Define public charge. Nobody can come if they have serious health issues. Define health issues. What if I get 2 doctors that say the guy can be cured in a week? Nobody can come in if, I'll just give you one example. One very important example. They said nobody can come in. You have to come to this country. We'll only accept you in America if you become sort of like independent. You see? If there's an agency that's bringing you over, so then that's no good, because then you're just bringing in all this cheap Mexican labor, as they say today. So bring all this cheap Jewish labor or whatever. So it has to be there. If it's a relative, that's okay. Because the way the immigration department figured is, you know, if a brother brings over a brother, he'll take care of him. If a parent brings over a child, if a child brings over a parent, Daddy can hear. All these Russian Jews, I mean, the German Jews aren't saying it's my cousin, I'm bringing him over. And so what do he do? And so he goes to the Secretary of State at that time in 1890, John Foster, the grandfather of who? John Foster Dulles, right? And that's why John Foster Dulles always wanted to be a Secretary of State. You understand? So, and John Foster Dulles is a leading Christian, and he says like this: the highest and all these kind of organizations are bringing the Jews over. Kol Yisrael Chaverim. Will you agree, as Secretary of State, that this will be considered bring over by relatives? And he says yes. It's actually a very liberal move on his part, even though it's not really true. But if the Jewish society says they'll take care of you, I mean, you know, this agency or that agency, whatever they had, the Hebrew immigrant, this society and that society, that'll count. That's a big deal. There's one of those little bureaucratic tricks and shticks which affect the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, which we don't usually pay attention to, but which really shine out to us in remarkable ways. In America by this time, by the time you get to 1890s, it's the end of the frontier. They've reached the Pacific. They got rid of all the Indians. That's what happened. They put the railroad there. There's no more go west, young men. They've gone as far as they're going to go. And for the first time, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant decision makers in this country say, no more immigrants. Until then, they always said we need new people to populate the territories. That was very smart of America. You're afraid that England's going to go and invade the central United States? Put 1 million Swedes there who consider them American citizens, and they're not going to do anything. You're worried about the Indians going and attacking settlement over here? Put 500,000 people in Chicago and another 500,000 people in St. Louis, and so the Indians aren't going to do anything. You see what I'm saying? But once you've already reached the full point, we have enough people. We don't really want any more. That kind of dynamic starts to express itself in American society. But big business, of course, still wants cheap labor. I wonder why. And so big business is the one who really lobbies the Congress against any kind of legislation to limit immigration in this country, because big business sees the immigration as their great and powerful tool against the labor unions, that they don't want the labor unions to have any power. I wonder why. And so as the 20th century dawns, Jewish immigration will go through the roof. And there's a reason for it. Who were the presidents at the beginning of the 20th century? Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft. Okay? Teddy Roosevelt. These are two blue bloods, right? He came from the first families, and he did too. And from the ultra upper crust elite of the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant establishment. And they're both very Hamish with Jews. It's for a different reason. It's very interesting. Teddy Roosevelt's not so hard. He was from New York. You ever hear of the place? He ran for office in New York. For mayor he ran. For police commissioner that he won. He ran with the governor. What does it take to be a successful politician in New York? I leave it. Okay. Now, and as a result, he and the Jews got along very well during the 8 years that he was in office. You see? A lot of Jews were Republicans in that time. Even though today, a Jewish Republican is, ooh, what's that? In those days, it wasn't like that at all. And he becomes buddy-buddy with the upper class, upper crust, wealthy Jewish millionaires, because that's the society he felt most comfortable with, naturally. But still, it means guys like Simon Wolf, who wasn't rich, but who had his ear, Jacob Schiff was the wealthiest Jew in America and one of the wealthiest people in America. Jacob Schiff was worth $65 million 100 and some years ago, right? What's that today? You know, he was one of the big deals in Wall Street. We spoke about him before. And Cyrus Adler, again, wasn't rich, but Cyrus Adler had a lot of, what's the right word, cachet, and the right entrees into all the high society and the administration. My favorite story with him, by the way, Cyrus Adler, that time was originally from Philadelphia, I spoke about him on my trip not long ago, was one of the founders of conservative Judaism in this country, conservative Judaism. And he was number 2 at the Smithsonian in the time of Teddy Roosevelt. And, you know, it was a government position he had. He's one of the first PhDs in Johns Hopkins University, if that means anything to anyone here. And he was a Shomer Shabbos in those days. Used to go home every week to the Mikveh Israel Synagogue, where some of us were, Philadelphia, because that's what you do. And but he's totally in with the rest of the Gentile society. Otherwise, he wouldn't reach the position that he was in. Didn't he, Trafe? It's interesting. And he gets a phone call on Friday morning when he's about to leave from President Teddy Roosevelt's secretary that says, there's an important meeting. The president has to see you tomorrow at 12, and be there. Click. And tomorrow's Shabbos. So what are you going to do about that? He's sitting there and starts writing a letter to the president. I can't come because of Shabbos. And then Teddy Roosevelt called him and says, forget the secretary. He forgot it was Shabbos. He said, we'll make it on Monday. So, which means that if you're a governor of New York, if you're a politician in New York, you understand such things. Whereas if you're a politician in Colorado, it could be that you don't. You understand? And I'm going somewhere with this. You'll see in a second. During Teddy Roosevelt's time, the American Jews start to organize for political purposes. The American Jewish Committee, it formed in 1905, 1906. These are the millionaires, the big shots, the Cyrus Adler and the Jacob Schiff types and Judge Sulzberger. These are people who want to make an American Jewish committee to lobby the government of the United States on Jewish matters. Simon Wolf says, you shouldn't do that. Let me talk to them. I know how to handle these people better than you. I have 50 years of experience. And they say, no, we want to do this in a big organized way. I won't go into all that Lashon Hara. Let me suffice it to say that the Jewish community was in the process of trying to organize itself politically. Jacob Schiff was, as I say, the wealthiest man. And Teddy Roosevelt expressed this in the following way. They're always complaining about the pogroms that are going on in Russia. In 1905, maybe you remember this, there was the Russian-Japanese War, and Teddy Roosevelt negotiated the end of the Russian-Japanese War, what they called the Treaty of Portsmouth in New Hampshire. He won a Nobel Prize for this. Notice he brought the Russians and the Japanese together, and they signed a peace agreement. And Portsmouth is up in New Hampshire. It's a ritzy kind of place. All the yachtsmen go there with all the fancy boats, including Jacob Schiff. And when the Russian delegate comes there, Count Witte, there, Teddy Roosevelt says, Monday and Tuesday you talk to the Japanese, Wednesday you talk to the Jews. Okay? And you got to talk to this guy Schiff. And the Russians wanted to talk to Schiff because Schiff was the reason the Russians lost the war. They had the Russian-Japanese War. You can't run. I hate to tell you this. It'll be a shock, but a war costs money. And where do you get money? So you see it printed. That kind of money doesn't work. You need real money. So where do you get money? You got to borrow from those who have it. 100 years ago, it's the same thing like today. It's Wall Street. You ever hear of the place? In 1904, when the Russian-Japanese War broke out, Jacob Schiff, who was one of the big machers in Wall Street, he says, I'm going to, and he said this in the paper. He says, I hate Russia. They're anti. He said these words. He said, I hate Russia. They destroy my people, and I'm gonna close off the money to them, and I'm gonna give the money to the Japanese, which he did do. He raised big loans for the Japanese because they're poor also, and he turned the money off for the Russians. And so the Russians wanted to meet him because a bully is always like that. If you punch me back in the nose, then I want to be your friend. You see? And so the result is that Teddy Roosevelt knew what's going on over here. And in the famous election of 1904, when he was elected president, he became president when McKinley was shot. So his first term was as a vice president who became a president. Then he ran on his own in 1904. And a lot of the money was Jewish money. That's not the only money. He was rich too. But Jacob Schiff and these guys raised a lot of money. When the election was over, Teddy Roosevelt was a politician. And he knew the first rule of politics, which is you reward your friends and punish your enemies. That is the first rule of politics. Otherwise, why should I want to be your friend? And the Jews had helped him. And so he repays this, not blatantly, of course, but he repays this by appointing a Jew for the first time in American history, to the cabinet. He appointed Oscar Strauss, who's one of these wealthy German Jews, to the Department of Labor and Commerce. Oscar Strauss. His brother was Nathan Strauss, otherwise known as Rehov Strauss, in next to Meir Sharmin Gula, right? Because Nathan Strauss gave the milk, the hospital there, which is now, what do you call it? The health Biker Cholim and so forth. It's not Biker Cholim, but it's the one across the street. But the point is that these are, from the hoity-toities, as it were. And why does he appoint him to the Department of Labor and Commerce? So it's like, it's a Jew, Labor and Commerce. I mean, where else are you going to put a Jew? Wrong. Department of Labor and Commerce owns Ellis Island. The Immigration Service is in the Department of Labor and Commerce. And so if the Jews are having any trouble with the thing, you're putting Usher Strauss, right, in as the secretary. And that means that for the next 5 years, the person in charge there is Jewish. If the bureaucrats know this, they act different. True? They act differently. And Oscar Strauss was not religious at all, but he famously, this is a true story, somebody was here once, I can't remember what it was, many years ago, showed me this in an old newspaper clipping. When Oscar Strauss was, in 1907, was the Secretary of Commerce and Labor, he didn't go to Shul Yom Kippur. Now, he wasn't so religious, he went to the Reform Temple and all the rest, but he didn't show up on Yom Kippur. And then afterward, they said, why don't you come to Yom Kippur? He said, I had to be at the office because they were going to deport 7,000 Jews. And I had to take care of that, which is a good reason. Because otherwise you go back to Europe, you know what that means. And so all the kind of business of health, what's the right word? Health qualifications, vision qualifications, are you mentally competent, and all that thing, makes a big difference if the Secretary of the Department is himself Jewish. There's a famous story, I've told it before, but I'll tell it again. Because nobody knows this, it's in the memoirs of Josephus Daniels. Teddy Roosevelt in 1907 was once speaking at a banquet, must have been given by a bunch of Jews or something, and in his classic style, he was a big bloviator and the press was there, and he said, there are people who asked me, why did you appoint Oscar Strauss? Did you want to appoint a Jew? No, I don't ask anyone's race, color, or creed. That pays no attention, no part whatsoever in my appointments. I asked, who's the best American? The best thing. And he said, isn't that right, Schiff? And Jacob Schiff was sitting next to him. He was an older man, and he had dozed off and fallen asleep. Right? And Schiff and the reporters, they spotted something. The reporters woke him up, and they said, what do you think? He said, what's going on? He said, the president was talking about the appointment of Strauss. He said, yes, sir. He called me up after the election. He said, Schiff, get me the best Jew you know. And because of that, Teddy Roosevelt, who was always attacking what he called the hyphenated Americans, he said you have to be 100% American. Not an Irish American, not a German American. He never, ever spoke about a Jewish American. He always exempted them. That's different. It's interesting. You understand? He, in his whole career till he died in 1990, he was always against the German Americans. Oh my goodness, he had that for them. And, what I'm saying, the Italian Americans, never the Jewish Americans. And to be perfectly fair, the Jews, even the ones that come over from Russia and from Poland, as you know, in that first decade especially, they wanted to Americanize not 100% but 200%. Nobody comes from Tsarist Russia saying, gee, I miss the old country, okay, right? See, if only we could be back under Tsar Nicholas. I mean, it doesn't work like that. They are the most patriotic of people, and there's no question about their, what shall I say, the melting pot is at that time, their assimilation into there. The last thing Theodore Roosevelt did before he died, the night before he died of in his sleep in 1919 after he had a certain pneumonia or something like that. It was something else. The flu, that's what it was. He had a certain flu. The last thing he did was he wrote a check. He just got his money from the 1905 Nobel Prize. It took him 15 years to send the check. I know a couple of shows like that. Anyway. And the last thing he did is he wrote 2 checks, one for the Catholic War veterans or something like that, and one for the Jewish War veterans. You understand? Which was his way of saying $500. It's not a little bit of money in those days. Notice he gave all the money away that he won from the Nobel Prize to charities. The last one he was for the Catholic war veterans and the Jewish war veterans. So it's very interesting. You'll see the results of this in a minute, but I want to make one more point before we take a look at the numbers. The next president was William Howard Taft from Cincinnati. again, many don't know this, a real blue blood. Let's put it this way. His father, Alphonso Taft, founded the Skull and Bones at Yale. Have you ever heard about that? Okay. Yeah, he's the founder. So you don't get more inner circle in the WASP culture than that. Alphonso Taft was Attorney General under Grant. After all of Grant's other attorney generals went to jail for crookedness, he had to find one honest guy, so he picked Taft. And afterwards, he was the minister to Russia also. But unlike the other ministers to Russia, he saw through the phony stuff, and he said, they're telling me it's all the Jews' fault, but I see what's really going on. He's an interesting guy, Alphonso Taft. And he was a good friend of Rabbi Isaac Mayer Wise, the founder of Reformed Judaism in America. The church and the synagogue were across the street from each other, and Taft is the only Unitarian present. They're Unitarians. So that's like Reformed Judaism, okay? And I mean this. And the two houses of worship regularly used to swap ministers. You understand? He used to speak about that. So a lot of times that Isaac Mayer Wise preached at the Unitarian Church of Taft, and the Taft's guy preached at the thing. The problem was nobody could tell the difference. But the fact is, but I'm going to tell you something. But in America of that time, this counts for things. I would go so far as to say that Alphonso Taft is the first person who issues. He was a famous judge in Ohio, early career, and he issued the first ruling as a judge against forced Bible readings in the schools. Now, you're saying, what's wrong with the Bible readings in the schools? The American. Well, let me read you his little piece over here. I pulled it down. An 1870 case called the Board of Education of Cincinnati versus Minor. Taft played a role in overturning the decision made by the Superior Court of Cincinnati in 1869 regarding the reading of Bible in public schools. Taft asserted that the school board had overstepped the boundaries in their decision to continue reading of Bible in public schools. Taft's discourse made there at the Supreme Court challenged the previous ruling, and he argued that according to the United States Constitution, Protestants do not have the right to control religion and public education sphere. This was blasphemy. Once upon a time, you don't know this, because you're living in the 20th century, 21st. In the 19th century, the public school was a Protestant institution. That's the way it was set up when it was founded. They didn't hide it. That's what it was. That's why the Catholics set up all the Catholic schools. They don't want to send their kids to public school. It's a Protestant institution. Now, it's no one particular type of Protestant, so they considered, since it's not Episcopalian or Methodist or Baptist, so it's okay. But if you're Jewish, it could be an issue. And in his discourse, Taft specifically referenced Jewish groups opposed to the reading of the Bible in public schools. As taxpayers, Taft argued that the Jews had the right to take advantage of a public secular education. In addition, religion was a matter of the home and protected by the Bill of Rights. To suggest that the Bill of Rights only reflects Protestant values was inappropriate, according to Taft, as religious liberty was given to all religious denominations, and Christianity is not to be regarded as sectarian under our Constitution. This is nothing to say in 1970, but it's a lot to say in 1870. You have to understand that. And so President William Howard Taft comes from a very interesting family. That's the point I'm trying to make over here. President Taft appointed as the successor to Oscar Strauss, because Oscar Strauss was a chassid of Theodore Roosevelt, appointed Charles Nagel, who was not Jewish. And so all the anti-Semites were happy. They finally got rid of this guy who's corrupting the immigration process and letting in all these undesirable Jews. And they bring in, he was a famous Missouri politician and a Christian, and finally put a regular, the right kind of guy in there. They just didn't know two things. First of all, the best friend of Charles Nagel was Simon Wolfe, okay? And number two, Nagel was married to the sister of Louis Brandeis. Okay? So, in Zivig Rishon, she died young. Anyway, the point is that, therefore, my point is that for over a decade, at the beginning of the 20th century, the U.S. Immigration Naturalization Service, the Department of Labor and Commerce, was under the direction and the control of two people who are not anti-Semitic. Let's put it this way. They were sympathetic to the very notion of Jewish immigration. And look at the numbers. Let's get around over here. It's 5,000, 20,000. Now let's go here. 75 to 106,000, 150,000, 150,000, 103,000, quarter million. These are the big numbers of the American Jewish population. people don't understand the importance of this cutesy stuff that I'm telling you right now. Because what it meant was that the restrictionist attitude, which will pop up later, and you and I know this, was not present in the early years of the 20th century due to some very interesting political and religious circumstances, okay? And it happened under the administration of two very white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft, who were highly educated and all the rest of it, but were enlightened and sympathetic in the Jewish question. They did not see Jewish immigration in this country as a problem because they perceived correctly. They knew that the Jews are coming here to assimilate. As an Orthodox rabbi, I might say they went too far. But from an American perspective, these people are not coming in to establish, like you see in the Muslim immigrants today, a little zone in which nobody else is allowed. The opposite. The problem with them is they want to get into the country clubs. They want to move to all the neighbors. They want to change their names. They want to get a nose job. They want to do everything they can to fit into America. And Taft, by the way, no, Taft has a speech. I'm going to put it one day in the where when has a speech where he basically says this. He says, you know, I know there are clubs that want to blackball Jews and all the rest of it, and you just got to realize that sometimes inferior people like to blackball people that they think will join the club because of this appearance. It's quite remarkable that someone like him would say a thing like this, and there you have it. But this is unusual. The WASP public, the broad masses, don't like this. During the first decade, there were moves in the United States Congress by pro-restriction type guys to bring in legislation restricting the immigration, but until 1910, Simon Wolf was able to get this guy totally on his side. If you know anything in American history, he was the Speaker of the House. He's called Czar Cannon. The reason Czar Cannon is nothing happened there without his total control. So you can put in all the bills you want. They're not going anywhere. This is famous. Joseph Cannon, for many years was a leading Republican congressional figure, and he was in the pocket, so to speak, over here, and nothing is going to happen in the Congress. But eventually he was overthrown in one of those power struggles, and instead that famous Mamzer Henry Cabot Lodge becomes the leading Republican figure over here from Massachusetts, and Henry Cabot Lodge was the polar opposite. According to Henry Cabot Lodge, there are too many Irishmen in this country by far. There are definitely too many Jews. You understand? Definitely too many Jews. And what are we going to do about this? Taft, I just want to finish on this note. Henry Cabot Lodge arranges that in 1912, Congress does pass a bill putting the quotas and restricting the immigration in this country. On the last day of office, it used to be, the president used to be March 4th. Now it's January 20th. You know that, right? In the original Constitution, until FDR, the new administration switched to March 4th. So on March 3rd, the last day in office, Taft vetoed the bill. You understand? And he bought another 10, 15 years in there, which means that he was a real friend of the Jewish people. Now, again, look at the chart. How many people coming under Taft? It's 250,000 a year. I mean, just before the First World War. What's that? It's 1911, 1912, 1913 to 1914. Okay, whatever. In other words, in this very short period, it's 500,000. That's my point. Erev HaMilchama. Because in 1914 starts the First World War, and then that's all over. Think of all the millions of poor Jews stuck over in the old country in World War I. I spoke about that here in the past. If you're in the area of the Eastern Front of World War I, when you had the Russian army, the German army, the death and the malaria and the typhus and things like that, plus the anti-Semitism and the pogrom, it was just terrible. And 500,000 got out of that just before the door closed. And the reason is because of what I just told you. You had enlightened presidents at that time, at least from the Jewish perspective, and you had enlightened secretaries of Commerce and Labor. Unfortunately, the new president is Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson was a Democrat, but was not Hamish. Okay? Woodrow Wilson used to be said very famously, the Democratic Party is composed of three elements, none of whom can be elected president. Southerners, Catholics, and Jews. You understand? Southerners, Irishmen, and Jews. And you can't elect a Southerner, can't elect an Irishman, can't elect a Jew. But the party was run by these groups, which was true. Except that Woodrow Wilson fooled him. He was a Southerner born in Georgia, but then he moved north and became a professor in Princeton, and then he ran for governor of New Jersey, and he won. So then when he ran for president, he's the governor of New Jersey already. They didn't know really he's a Southerner who was a friend of the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, if you know, where did they have the showing of the, what's that movie I'm talking about? D.W. Griffith, you know. They had it at the Birth of a Nation. They had it in the White House. Okay? So, anyway, Woodrow Wilson is not Hamish. Now, as a Democrat, he does what he needs to do, but without any Hamishkeit. It reminds us of certain other Democratic presidents we won't go into. And he appoints a new, and they broke the Department of Labor and Commerce into two departments. The Department of Labor, Department of Commerce, and the Ellis Island is under the Department of Labor, and the new Labor Secretary is William Wilson, who was a Scottish immigrant. He is not sympathetic to the Jews. Zero. Forget, it's not Nagel, it's not Strauss, it's nobody like that. It's quite the opposite. There's already unemployment in America. People are saying, too many immigrants coming in. Things are in trouble if the Jews, the best friends they have is William Jennings Bryan, Josephus Daniels, Secretary of State and Secretary of the Navy. He's a Southerner, and William Jennings Bryan is the guy who, as you know, fought against Clarence Darrow in the monkey trial. These were the best friends of the Jews in the Wilson administration. So things were not like they were under Theodore Roosevelt, even though I'll say before, Woodrow Wilson did whatever, he couldn't go against the Jews and like that, but the attitudes change, and this presages, this prophesies a bad end. Okay? The outbreak of World War I, there's no immigration in 1914, 1918, because the war's going on. By this time, racialism was becoming mainstream in America. This guy, who is forgotten today, happily, wasn't 100 years ago, Madison Grant. His books sell tremendously. He's unbelievably popular, and he's the idea of the white race. No, I said it wrong. The North European. No, I said it wrong. The Northwest European white race. Everybody else is junk. Okay? And America was founded by the Northwest European white race. Look at his famous best-selling book, The Passing of the Great Race. Used to be a great America, and then all the Jews come in, the Irish, now the Italians, the Greeks. It's the East Europe, the Poles. It's going to run the country into the ground. You see? Because the American system was meant for a certain type of white man. Not for white men, a certain type of white man. And you tell me where you're born, and I can tell you what your nose is going to look like. And if your nose doesn't look like that, it's mixed blood. You get it? It's down to a total science. Hitler took it to extreme. That never happened in America, but in Johns Hopkins University, and in Columbia University, and in Harvard University, there were classes in racialism. They call it under different anthropological names and different ethnography, but this was considered a science, even though it isn't. The great opponent of this was around that time, which was Franz Boas, a Jew from Germany who became a professor at Columbia, and he fought for years against this on strictly scientific grounds. But you know and I know, when it comes to this, you're never really going to convince the vast majority of American people, forget the science, you're never really going to convince them that the black man and the white man are the same, that the red man and the yellow man and the black man are the same, no matter what the science you show them, because people have this prejudice from the Kishkas. You're never going to convince them that an Irishman and an Italian is the same, People feel much more comfortable, even today in 2013, saying, oh, he's a that, right? They won't say it in public, but they'll say it in private. And what you say in private becomes it can become a dominant discourse in American culture, and it does. It certainly does. As a result, you start to see manifestations of racism in America such as you didn't see before. Leo Frank is lynched during Woodrow Wilson's administration. You know about Leo Frank. I don't have to tell you. In Georgia. Wrong kind of Jew, in wrong place, at wrong time. And Congress does pass. Democratic Congress passes the Alien Exclusion Act of 1915. Woodrow Wilson vetoes it because of pressure from all the different big business groups and the Jewish groups and the other groups. But Congress passed it 2 years later in 1917. Wilson vetoes it, and Congress overrides the veto. So here you are in the middle of World War I. Close the doors. Wrong people are getting into this country, too many of them. In 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution breaks out in Russia, as we know. And you have the senseless carnage of Europe. By then, millions and millions of people getting killed, charging in the trenches. For what? For what? All quiet on the Western Front. They all get killed one after another. For what? And it's not going anywhere. Henry Ford, the famous car manufacturer, becomes convinced this is so screwy, it can only be a plot. It can only be a plot. And if it's a plot, who did it? Well, as Henry Ford famously says, current events show that the protocols of the elder design are true. I mean, it fits like a glove. And the protocols of the elder design is that the Jews will come and they'll set one country after another and they'll cause huge carnage and they will take over with a small group. I mean, this is what's happening. So, I don't have to be a big intellectual. I know what I see. And so he starts the Dearborn Independent newspaper, as I'm sure many people go. And these are new things that never entered American life in any significant way prior to 1917. So here history is going backwards. It's supposed to be in the old days where, and they get more enlightened as you go on. In America, the 19th century was the enlightened type. And as you get into the 20th century, things get worse, which is interesting food for thought. The war itself, America gets in the war, and World War I was a senseless war. What they get killed for? Nobody can answer that question. The Red Scare, I'm sure many of you know, that right after the war, they think the communists are going to take over America because somebody blew up Wall Street, put a bomb there, and put a bomb in the Attorney General's house, and so they make raids all over the country, and if it's the raids, it's against the Reds. And if you say the Reds, everybody knows the Reds, and most of the Reds are... Okay, so there's a rising anti-Semitic hysteria. If you get to 1919, 1920, if you study this closely, there were a great wave of anti-black pogroms all across America in 1919, but a whole lot of them. There actually a book came out a couple years ago called 1919. It's pretty sad what went on over there. And you have the rising anti-Semitism. Fortunately, at this time, a fellow who was not Jewish named John Spargo was bothered by this because he was a liberal and a socialist in America in the best sense of the word, and he writes this famous letter and gets everybody to sign it. I've spoken about before, and they put it all in the newspapers beginning 1920. And it's a message to the American people where it says, the undersigned, citizens of Gentile birth and Christian faith, view with profound regret and disapproval the appearance in this country of what is apparently an organized campaign of anti-Semitism conducted in close conformity to and in cooperation with similar campaigns in Europe. We regret exceedingly publication of books, pamphlets, and newspaper articles designed to foster distrust and suspicion of our fellow citizens of Jewish ancestry and faith, distrust and suspicion of their loyalty and patriotism. These publications, to which wide circulation has been given, are introducing into our national political life a new and dangerous spirit, one that is wholly at variance with our traditions and ideals and subversive of our system of government. American citizenship and democracy are challenged and menaced. Notice we are against this because it's going to hurt America. It's going to hurt all of us. It's not a question of Jews. It's a question of us. We protest against this organized campaign of prejudice, hatred, not only because of its manifest injustice to its dedicated, but because also and especially because we're convinced that it's incompatible with loyal and intelligent American citizenship. And the logical, it goes on and on. Here's the main point, or the one that strikes me. Anti-Semitism is almost invariably associated with lawlessness, brutality, and injustice. It's 20 years before Hitler. It is also invariably found intertwined with sinister forces of corrupt, reactionary, and oppressive. We believe it should not be left, now listen to this, it should not be left to men and women of the Jewish faith to fight this evil, but it is in a very special sense the duty of citizens who are not Jews by ancestry and faith. We therefore make earnest protest against this vicious propaganda, call upon our fellow citizens of Gentile birth and Christian faith to unite their efforts and crush it. We call upon the ministers and the publicists and all the rest of it. And look at the signers. It's everybody. It's Woodrow Wilson, William Howard Taft, the leading Catholic cardinal, William Cardinal O'Donnell, and there's a whole list of names. If you get, these are the who's in America one time. This is the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant establishment. It's interesting. It's a proud moment in American history. It's not so well known because it put a damper on Henry Ford. Because that's what they're talking about. Everybody knows what they're talking about. And because of this, they basically say like this. What he's doing is trafe. Okay? You can criticize somebody all the rest. Once you start this business, then what you're doing is trafe, and it's a danger to America. It's a danger to us. Right? It's a danger to us, as he said. It's not the problem of the Jews. It's a remarkable document. There's not one Jew signed on it. Not one Jew wrote it. This has nothing, this is entirely a Christian or a Gentile. That's a better word, because none of them were believers. It's an entire Gentile document, and they said this is a danger to America. And so what they were saying was the following. No anti-Semitism in America. However, they did not address the issue, and nobody would address the issue. But what about more immigration in the country? That a consensus was forming. That the racialists got in. So much so that by 1924, the ideas of Henry Ford resonated with the public to some degree or another, and the Johnson Act is elected. Now, in the last years, look at this. This is right after World War I. Look at it. 1921, 118,000. That's a lot. 1922, 23 is 50,000 a year. Down from the old numbers, but that's a lot. 1924, the year of the act, is 50,000. And then it's 10,000, 9,000, and so forth. That's how it goes for, all during the Holocaust years. It's more or less those kind of numbers, more or less. And so they didn't say no Jews, but there was no category for Jews. Instead, as you'll see later on, the chart of how many people can come from Germany, how many people can come from Norway, and they put a quota, the schedules, and Lithuania gets 2,000, right? The Belgian Congo gets 1. Germany gets 50,000. England gets 35, 40,000. That's how they make their prejudices enacted into law. The presidents at that time were Coolidge and Hoover, two very conservative Republicans. We'll come across Hoover later, but they were totally fine with this. They were not. I won't say they're anti-Semitic because they weren't. Certainly not in any sense that we said before. But enough is enough, right? Let's catch our breath. Let's digest what we already have. This was the consensus, and this came in there, which brings us to the 1930s, and Franklin Roosevelt, we know, and this consensus on isolationism in general and supporting exclusion of immigrants in particular was basically universal. Roosevelt himself, first of all, he actually agreed with this. Understand? He was like these other guys. They won't say he's anti-Semitic because that's not true, but he was a racialist. You understand? And he said, enough is enough. We have all the Jews we can handle over here. And it's also true that public opinion was of such a nature in the 1930s that he wasn't the type of guy to go against it. Somebody once said like this, Hitler goes like this, and Mussolini go like this, and Roosevelt go like this. You understand? And there's truth to that. Plus, the leading figures in the country, Senator Nye and William Randolph Hearst and Bullitt Wheeler, all were pushing isolationism. They said, look what happened in World War I. We got schlepped in this. The war was a total waste of time. It was all just a big plot to drag the Americans in. Wall Street made all the money, which is true. All this is true. He didn't say it was Jews. There was plenty of non-Jews as well. But the whole thing was a mistake. Do not get involved in the war that's obviously coming on the horizons in Europe. America should stay out of World War II. And this is the isolationist position. We today mock it and diss it and all the rest of it. It shouldn't be. Shouldn't be. There's a good argument that can be made for isolationism. And if we weren't Jews, you could hear it a lot better. And I'm going to be speaking about that in a second. The first Roosevelt administration was in 1933 to 37. Hitler was not yet in full throttle. War was not yet visible in the horizon, not closely. Isolationism, immigrant exclusion was the total consensus in this country. The Depression didn't help because people felt there's no jobs. FDR agrees with the restrictive policies of the State Department. He was in charge. Instead of 50,000 here, it's 11,000, as I told you before. Judge Brandeis. By the way, look at this. Germany gets 50,000. Poland gets 5,000. You know that Italy gets 3,000. I mean, that Congress is sending a message every year. Louis Brandeis, who was the Supreme Court justice, was a Yiddish Yid. You know, it's interesting when he did a lot of lobbying behind the doors, and he protested the Cordell Hall, but none of that helped. Then you come to the second Roosevelt administration, which is what I want to concentrate on next few minutes. 1937-41. Then already, as you know, World War II broke out during that time, during Roosevelt's second administration. World War II broke out in 1939, as we all know. There are steps to war. Everybody who had a brain can see is coming. You know, you get the Anschluss, and you get the Sudetenland, and you get the Rhineland. You know all those things that were happening at that time. The public in America divides into a small number of interventionists versus a large number of isolationists. Roosevelt tested the waters. Remember I told you this? He made a speech called "Let's Quarantine the Aggressors," and everybody said, "Oh no, he's going to get us in the war." And he had a ton of mail saying, "Don't do that." And Roosevelt said, "I was just kidding." 1938, which was quite a year. That's the year of the Munich Pact, of the Anschluss in Austria, and all the other things there. Roosevelt appoints as ambassador to England Joseph Kennedy. Okay, JFK's father, self-made man, Harvard graduate, Irish. Do I say he doesn't like Jews? Not so simple. Very smart guy. If you want to read about it, very clever guy. He made his millions. You know, nobody gave him the money. He made his millions, sometimes legally, sometimes illegally. I've heard that's happened to other people in America too. Not here, of course, not in Baltimore, but elsewhere. The fact is, you don't get that way if you're not very smart. He just had his own peculiar ideas, but he's a very, very shrewd person, both into Wall Street. He was together with all the Jews in Hollywood in the 1920s. He, was together with, with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer and all those type of guys. So he's too intelligent to be a regular type of anti-Semite. But he doesn't like Jews because why should he? I'm not Jewish. I'm Irish. You know, they don't like me. Why do I like them? You know, that kind of attitude. No, I'm going somewhere with this. He's not really a sympathizer. He doesn't say, let's kill the 6 million Jews. He's not like that at all, although he certainly was portrayed like that when I was growing up. So he knows that Jews are clever and smart, but he's a principled isolationist and a shrewd customer. How would someone like Kennedy, or the vast majority of American people, look at Europe in the 1930s? Here's Europe in 1938. Here's Germany. Here's Poland. Look how big Russia is. And that's only part of Russia. The rest, Russia goes all the way to the east. Russia was Stalin. That's a big danger. And it is. You know that. What keeps America going? Balance of power. You need a strong Germany to balance off communist Russia. You see what I'm saying? It's in America. England and France do the same thing. Why did Chamberlain, after all the cynicism is over, why did Chamberlain and those guys sell out Czechoslovakia and Austria? Well, what's their policy? They call it appeasement. What's the idea of appeasement? We don't want to get involved in a war with Germany, because we get involved with Germany, he gains. Stalin wins. All of which is exactly true. So why do we want to get involved in a war which we're going to shecht each other and the communists will come and take over? You understand? Now, the liberals and the interventionists never addressed this issue. Either they said Russia is a benign country or something like that, but it's a socially advanced democracy, etc., all of which is a lie. And so where's it going? Now, Joseph Kennedy's no dummy. To him, he raises the question, and all these isolationists raise the following question. Let's go to the next slide. What's the difference between him and him? We're at the end of the day. What's the difference? So the answer is, there's only one word. What's the difference between him and him? It's the Jews. If you want to be honest about it. Right? We view him as particularly evil and him differently. Why? Because you say Hitler carried out the Holocaust. He carried out plenty of Holocausts. You understand? If you're Jewish, you're obviously going to look at Hitler particularly evil. That's how Kennedy sees it. That's how the isolationists see it. You get what I'm saying? And so the Jews, for perfectly understandable reasons, can't see what the objective interests are for America, which is have them fight each other, kill each other, or balance each other out, because either way, it'll be bad for us. You get it? And so, that's why I say, if you read the new biography of Kennedy, it's kind of interesting. He comes in and into England. He sees, Europe is going to war. The only way out of American entanglement in World War II, the only way to keep us out of the war, and he wants to stay out of the war, because my son might get killed, and he was killed. Correct? The son and the daughter. The only way to keep him out of the war is we've got to extract the Jewish quotient from the situation. By this time, he's kicking himself. Why do we make a law to keep the Jews out? If they would let in the Jews like in Teddy Roosevelt's time, all the German Jews would leave in 1933-34. How many Jews were there in Germany altogether? 500,000. Man, big deal. That's 2-3 years. Bring them over in one thing. Everybody's unemployed anyway. Who cares? Another 250,000 not going to matter. I mean, this is how he's thinking. And then there'll be no pressure in America to side against Hitler and in favor of Stalin, but leave the two of them to stew in their own juices. This way, this is what he writes, all the Jewish newspapers, all the guys in Hollywood that I know who control the media, and all the guys who are friends with Roosevelt, like Frankfurter and Burke and all the rest, they're saying Hitler, 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 and they won't see Stalin, 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 Stalin. I totally understand where they're coming from, but as an American who's not Jewish, I see this is dragging our country down to ruin. But what are you going to do? He knows very well you can't change the climate of opinion in America. He's one of the people who helped create it, to keep the Jews out. And so he's in a fine pickle, is he not? And so it's very interesting, as I say, if you read the new biography of Kennedy, as he operates in 1938 and 1939, he meets, you won't believe this, Kennedy had meetings with Chaim Weizmann. I wish I was there. Joe Kennedy and Jabotinsky. I mean, that's got to be one. I would like to be a fly on the wall in that one. But he'll do anything, right? He'll do anything. If it was up to him, let him on to Palestine. Just get him out of Europe, Get him out of Europe. Get him out of Germany. Of course, it gets a little harder when Hitler takes over Austria. It's another 250,000 Jews. And it gets a little harder when he takes over Czechoslovakia. It's another 100,000 Jews. I get it, but I'm talking about the way things looked like at that time. But England says, listen, we're making the white paper. There's too many Jews in Palestine. We're cutting off the immigration over here. And he kind of understands that. And so what he does, and what Roosevelt does, and I told you before what Sumner Wells do, is that let's look around the world. Can we find any empty land, any Karka Basula, where you can stick the Jews? Maybe the Amazon jungle, I mean it. Maybe in Rhodesia, my favorite, My favorite, as I told you, I said it here once in the past, Sumner Wells, who was the Undersecretary of State, who meant well. He was actually a friend of the Jews, believe it or not. He's like this, Tijuana, okay? The Baja California. He figured out somehow or other it was empty. And you know something? We shouldn't laugh. Halavai, they could take the 6 million Jews and put them in Southern California. All the joking aside. In fact, Halavai, they should take all the Jews and put them in the Amazon jungle. It's better than Auschwitz. You see? But it wasn't realistic, was it? And especially in 1938, 1939. And so he's grasping at straws. And so what's going to happen? He tells Weizmann, and it's on the book. He tells Weizmann, he says, I'm going to go and talk to Hitler. Right? Man to man and anti-Semite to anti-Semite. And I say like this, stop bothering the Jews because it's going to lead America into the war against you, which is against your own interest. Cooperate with me in figuring somewhere we can put the Jews. Not because I like the Jews or you like the Jews. You know, man to man. Chaim Weizmann says, I understand whenever you bring up the Jews and Hitler, he starts chewing the rug, he goes crazy, all the rest of it. And Kennedy said, let me see what I can do. It never happens. It's one of those what ifs, and I don't know. Yeah, what ifs. Who can tell? But it goes to show you, because a very smart guy, he says, if we hadn't put up these immigration barriers, the whole Hitler issue wouldn't exist. Because by 1933, 1936, the Jews would just go to America. Now, how many Jews are we talking about altogether, if you want to get down to it? 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, 5 million at most, not even 5 million. They get down to it. Sounds like to a non-Jew, like, and the whole America is not that big of a scheme. And look what they would gain. Conduct the whole bullet and stay out of World War II. And therefore, we wouldn't have a situation where Hitler would destroy, not one Jew would get killed, let Hitler and Stalin destroy each other, etc., etc., etc. You understand? So it doesn't happen. Instead, the British issue the white paper. We have the St. Louis, you know, when America won't let anybody in, the approach of war. Kennedy is terrified that the Jews, led by the Jewish media and opinion makers, will make emotional decisions, not rational decisions about how they relate to the coming conflict. I don't want to lose my sons. As you and I know, he does lose his sons. World War II does get involved there. One of the big reasons, not the only reason, one of the big reasons that America sides against Hitler is because the loathing of how he's treating the Jews. That's a fact. All that's going to happen, as Kennedy says, will eliminate one dictator for another, open the way for another, who'll be just as dangerous to American security, all of which is true. We all learned this the hard way in 1945 when all of a sudden we faced communism. Okay? And America found itself for the first time no longer able to not have an army. How big was the army under Roosevelt before America went into the war? 150,000. The whole U.S. Army. You see? Does Kennedy ponder what might have been if America had not kept the Jews out? I don't know. Hoover and Hearst, Herbert Clark Hoover and William Randolph Hearst, who saw the world the same way Kennedy did, spent the years trying to help the Jews. It's interesting. Believe it or not, they joined the Berkson Committee. You know what that is. That's the Jabotinskyites who tried to protest to Roosevelt that they're not saving enough Jews. Herbert Hoover, for crying out loud. William Randolph Hearst. When Peter Berkson starts to go against the American Jewish establishment in 1943, and he wants to get newspaper advertisements to hit the wide public, they go to see, I don't know if you noticed, they go to see William Randolph Hearst, who is Citizen Kane, right? And is associated usually with big anti-Semite, and he wasn't. Not at all. And William Randolph Hearst said like this, I hear what you're saying, I totally agree with your point, you get free publicity on all my papers. Right? And I'm not only that, I'm going to sign an editorial, he said, that's my signature, saying back this committee, that's my instructions all over the country. In Baltimore, he had the News American, in other countries, in every city, he had all hundreds of newspapers. Go figure that out. By the time the war's over, some begin to question the exclusion policy, a little bit late. Truman is conflicted. He likes the Johnson Act. He was a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant American, but he also feels deep sympathy for the DPs. He does. Truman issues what's called the Truman Directive of December 1945. Here's Truman with the Jewish leaders. Here's the main guy, Eddie Jacobson. But I want to tell you something. It's a special order under Truman of which 22,000 DPs, two-thirds Jewish, entered the United States between December 2245 and 1947. That's how my father got into this country, on the Truman Directive. He had a certain reason, but he got in 46. The other DPs have to stay behind. So it's a conflicted act. In 1948, Congress passes the 1948 Immigration Act. 400,000 DPs are admitted into America. It's election year. Wait a minute, sounds very good. The vast majority of these people who are let in are Christians from Eastern Europe and the Baltics, many of whom have been forced laborers in Germany. The anti-requirement favored agricultural laborers to such an extent that Truman himself, when he was running for president in 1948, said that this law is flagrantly discriminatory against the Jews. Congress amended the law in 1950, but by that time, the Aliyah had happened in Israel. What I'm telling you, here's a vague of history. Suppose Congress would have passed a truly liberal law in 1948 and said that all those who want to, DPs, can come to America, there would be no state of Israel, or there'd be no Aliyah. All the DPs, 90%, would go to America. Instead, they had nowhere to go in 1948, 1949, 1950, until Congress jiggled with the laws, and said they had to go, stuck to go in a place called Israel, with all the results that I discussed last winter in this series. And a lot of Nazis, by the way, and fascist types came in under that sort of thing. My mother was not a DP. She had to go by the Czechoslovakia quota. Czechoslovakia quota is 3,000 a year, okay? Which take them forever. You understand? That's a very small number. She would be here for many, many years over in Europe if she would get in altogether. The only thing is that America is still the land of politics and lobbying, and as a result of the fact that I had an uncle and aunt in Minneapolis at that time, this guy, I hope everybody recognizes, he was the new elected senator, and so he moved it to the front, you know what I mean, whatever they do to get it a higher priority, and that's how she came in 1949, in the end of 49. If she would go on the regular schedule, who knows how long it would take, and who knows if I would be here and others. And so I conclude by saying that look what the United States paid, and look what the isolationists did, shoot themselves in the foot. They created a situation America got in World War II. They did destroy the fascism. They unleashed the war for the communism, which put a big threat to the national security of the United States, caused us to spend trillions, which is one of the reasons, not the only reason, but it's one of the big reasons we're in the hole today. We spend on the Cold War. We paid for everybody else in the Cold War. You know that I know it. As a matter of fact, I always have a dream. President of the United States would go one day on international television and says, we're canceling all the debts because, look, guys, we spend all our money in the 20th century, bailing you guys out. Otherwise, there wouldn't be no free world. And now, that's coming home to roost. Of course, that won't happen. But this is what I mean when I say that there are unintended consequences sometimes of discriminatory policies. And it very often happens that when you think you've done something very clever to kick the other person out, you actually ended up shooting yourself in the foot and paying a big price. This country is in a state, I'm sorry to say this, because this is the best country, but the country is in a permanent state of financial crisis, as you know, economic crisis, because of the unbelievably gigantic debts that we run up, and we find ourselves still compelled to run up in this world which is absent a balance of power, and therefore America is backing all the other countries, and we're paying for it through the nose, and where is it going to go? I'm finished now, but I want to call upon a very old friend of our family to say Al Malachim and say a word or two about my mother. Does she want to? Leah Bus, how are you, Levi? Oh, Levi. I'll tell you. Yeah, that's all. You don't have to say anything. You just say the Kimmel Rach. Whatever you want to say is fine. Who else should do it if not you?
Well, before I say the Elmul Rachman, I'm here in a very subjective position. Rabbi Katz's mother, I knew very well. And I must say, she was the epitome of what a lady should be, but also an intellectual, which both, and of course, Shomer Shabbos, Frum. These three sometimes conflict today. But I won't say, I called, of course, Rabbi Katz, I called her Lenka, and I must say it was an honor and a privilege that I met her. And then I have a few words to say. Whatever Rabbi Katz said, I'm a subject. I came out of Buchenwald. And here I want to say a few words. You would think that whatever Rabbi Katz has said, and those like myself who smelt and saw the flames in Buchenwald, that we would have been here very welcome. The fact is we were persona non grata. And here I must say, everybody knows that. I mean, my friend Oliver Sholem, Isaac Kaufman said, and I have to say the same thing. Without Rabbi Hertzberg, I wouldn't have been what I am. Neither would have had my son or my children, and my wife, I don't know if she would have. So Rabbi Hertzberg was not just who gave us a home, but he, in medical terms, there's a word catharsis. In plain English, in Yiddish, it's called Meretzach aus vom Herz. The fact is, very few, none of them, wanted to hear that what Treblinka was Chelmner was Majdanek was. It was a subject you passed on. It made, like the Rabbi used to say, of course you talk about it, at the nicht kennen essen in groben steak. He would get indigestion. It would interfere with his juices. I and Isaac Kaufman, we were part of the Mishpoche, adopted. But there were others who came there, many just to talk, just to be able to talk to somebody who wants to hear what we suffered. And there's another subject here. You would think the Jewish community would have been so today, everybody is a Holocaust museum. Well, a lot of rabbis in Baltimore, they give you a Geschmack word. Rabbi Katz takes a trip to the Holocaust Museum. Here in Baltimore, not too many, I don't know of any. But I want to bring out how this, and this is right here. Rabbi Katz gave a perspective as an academician, as a historian. I'm not. I lived through it. And it's right here in this shul it happened. I remember, and it was, well, in 1950, 51, 52. And who did I speak to? To a son of Rabbi Hertzberg, Shaye. And I remember they are still on Main Avenue. I stood there, near there. And one of them, yeah, a congregant here, Shabbos, said, Usha, how long are you going to keep on talking about that? That was it. But then there was a Eichmann trial, 1960. And there was no Ushas, and there was no Iche. There were documents. Documents signed by Heydrich, by Himmler, by Eichmann, and everybody. A one-day conference, where you this. So one day, and there was somebody here who, like myself, was liberated in Buchenwald. And we were both together in Block 66, which was a teenager block. So on Shabbos, the person comes over to me, says, Usha, ich mit der Reppe suchen. Fine. He wanted an aliyah. No? Most likely, I think the liberation was on Thursday or Friday. It must have been on a Thursday because either on Monday or Thursday during the week. So the Rabbi asked him, why do you want an aliyah? He said, I was liberated today. His reply was, for that you want an aliyah? But that was after Eichmann trial, not before. So I just want to give my appreciation, certainly to Rabbi Katz, for having not only the sensitivity and the privilege that he let me speak to you, give me, and express again, I have always expressed my appreciation and my gratitude to the Rav Hertzberg and the Rebbetzin. El Mulerachamin, Shoychen Bemroimem, El Mulerachamin, Shoychen Bemroimem, Hametzei Menichunochoinu al Kampfa Shino, Bemalois Gedeutschen, und der Heuren, Gesauer Kiemas Jes Nishmas, Beyebas Arje Leib, Sheholach es Nishmas, Loilum Bavir, Sholchalolum Bavir, Sedukabat, Kaskuras, Nishmusum, Beganeden, Jitten Sedukabat, Haskurai, Nishmusum, Tehei, Minachusum, Luchain Balu Rachman, Beganeden, Tehei, Minachusum, Luchain Bal Yasirei, Meseis of Knufov, Leolum and Beyusra,